When 17-year-old Anna disappeared during the festival of Saint João, the villagers of Iranduba whispered the same name their grandmothers had feared for generations, the Boto Cor de Rosa. The village of Iranduba had celebrated the festival of Saint João the same way for over a century, with bonfires crackling along the banks of the Rio Solimões and the sound of foro music drifting across the dark waters. But this year's celebration would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. Ana Cristina Santos, the daughter of the village's most respected fisherman, had been dancing with her friends near the river's edge when the music stopped and the laughter died. When her mother, Rosa, went to find her daughter as the evening wound down, Anna was nowhere to be found. The search began immediately, with every able-bodied person in the village combing the shoreline and calling Anna's name into the humid night air. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the familiar landmarks of their small community. The wooden houses on stilts, the fishing boats tied to weathered docks, and the endless wall of jungle that surrounded their isolated world. But as dawn broke over the muddy waters of the river, there was still no sign of the missing girl. It was Anna's grandmother, Dona Conceição, who first spoke the words that everyone else was thinking, but afraid to say. "The Boto took her," she whispered to Rosa as they sat exhausted on the porch of their riverside home. "Just like he took my sister Lourdes 60 years ago, and her grandmother before that." Rosa wanted to dismiss the old woman's words as the superstitions of a bygone era, but she couldn't ignore the pattern that seemed to repeat itself generation after generation. In the villages along the Amazon's tributaries, the legend of the Boto Cor de Rosa, the pink river dolphin that could transform into a handsome man to seduce young women, was as old as the communities themselves. According to the stories passed down through generations of river dwellers, the creature would appear at festivals and celebrations, always dressed in white with a hat to hide the blowhole on top of his head. He would charm the most beautiful girl at the gathering, dance with her until she was completely enchanted, and then lead her to the water's edge, where she would disappear forever into the depths of the river. But Rosa had always considered these tales to be nothing more than folklore, stories invented to explain the occasional tragic drowning, or to give families something to blame when a young woman simply chose to leave the isolation of village life for the opportunities of the city. She was a modern woman, educated enough to know the difference between legend and reality. Yet as she stared out at the dark waters where her daughter had vanished, she found herself remembering every detail of the stories her own grandmother had told her, and wondering if there might be more truth in the old legends than she had ever wanted to believe. 3 days after Anna's disappearance, Rosa received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a marine biologist from the Federal University of Amazonas, had driven 6 hours from Manaus after hearing about the missing girl on the local radio. But Elena wasn't just another researcher drawn by academic curiosity. She had a personal connection to the legend that had haunted these river communities for generations. Her own great-aunt had vanished under similar circumstances in the 1940s, and Elena had spent the last decade quietly investigating cases that seemed to follow the same inexplicable pattern. "I know this sounds impossible," Elena told Rosa as they sat in the small living room of the Santos family home, "but I've documented 17 similar disappearances along the Amazon River system over the past 50 years. Always young women, always during festivals or celebrations, always near the water." She opened a worn leather portfolio and spread out photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten testimonies from families across the region. The official reports always list them as drownings or runaways, but the witnesses describe the same thing every time: a charming stranger in white who appears just before the disappearance. Rosa studied the documents with growing unease. The photographs showed young women from different decades and different villages, but they all shared a haunting similarity. They were beautiful, vibrant girls in their teens or early 20s, always photographed at festivals or community gatherings in the days before they vanished. The newspaper clippings told stories that could have been carbon copies of Anna's disappearance. Families searching desperately, communities united in grief, and always the whispered mention of the Boto legend that no one wanted to discuss openly. What are you suggesting? Rosa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That the legend is real? That some kind of creature is actually taking these girls? Eleanor shook her head slowly, but her expression remained troubled. I'm a scientist. Rosa, I deal in facts and evidence, but I can't ignore the patterns I've found, and I can't explain why these disappearances keep happening in exactly the same way, in communities that are hundreds of miles apart and have no contact with each other. That evening, Elena joined the ongoing search efforts, bringing with her sophisticated underwater cameras and sonar equipment that she normally used to study dolphin populations. As she and a team of local fishermen took boats out onto the dark waters of the Rio Solimões, she explained her theory to anyone willing to listen. Pink river dolphins are incredibly intelligent creatures, she said, adjusting her equipment as their boat moved slowly through the current. They have complex social structures, sophisticated communication systems, and problem-solving abilities that we're only beginning to understand. In some documented cases, they've shown behaviors that seem almost deliberate. As if summoned by her words, a sleek pink form surfaced near their boat, its distinctive dorsal fin cutting through the water with a grace that seemed almost supernatural in the moonlight. The fishermen fell silent, their usual chatter replaced by the kind of respectful quiet that comes over people when they encounter something that defies easy explanation. Elena raised her underwater camera, but before she could take a photograph, the dolphin dove beneath the surface and disappeared into the black depths of the river, leaving behind only ripples that caught the reflection of the stars above. On the 5th day of the search, just as hope was beginning to fade, Anna was found. A group of fishermen discovered her on a small island 3 kilometers downstream from Iranduba, sitting on the sandy shore as if she had simply been waiting for someone to find her. She was unharmed, her white festival dress somehow still clean despite having been missing for days, but she had no memory of how she had gotten there or what had happened to her since the night she disappeared. When Rosa rushed to the hospital in Manaus, where Anna had been taken for observation, she barely recognized her daughter. Anna's eyes held a distant, dreamy quality that hadn't been there before, and she spoke in a soft, distracted voice, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. I remember dancing, Anna told her mother, her gaze fixed on the window that looked out over the Rio Negro. There was music, and someone was holding my hand. He was wearing white, and he smelled like the river after rain. But I can't remember his face. Dr. Elena, who had remained in Iranduba to continue her research, interviewed Anna extensively about her missing days. The girl's accounts were frustratingly vague, filled with dreamlike imagery that seemed to drift between reality and fantasy. I was underwater, but I could breathe, Anna said during one session. There were others there, women who looked like me but older. They were singing, and their voices sounded like whale songs. They told me I was chosen, that I was special, but I don't understand what they meant. The medical examinations revealed something that puzzled the doctors. Despite having been missing for 5 days with no apparent food or shelter, Anna showed no signs of dehydration, malnutrition, or exposure. Her skin was actually more radiant than before, with a subtle luminescence that seemed to come from within. Most mysteriously, her lungs showed an increased capacity that medical science couldn't explain, as if she had somehow adapted to breathing underwater during her disappearance. Eleanor's investigation took on new urgency as she began to uncover disturbing patterns in Anna's case that matched the other disappearances she had documented. In village after village, she found stories of young women who had returned after days or weeks missing near the water, all with the same dreamy demeanor and fragmented memories of their time away. But these women shared another characteristic that their families rarely discussed openly. Within a year of their return, they had all given birth to children with unusual traits. The children of the chosen ones, as they were whispered about in riverside communities, were born with an uncanny affinity for water. They learned to swim before they could walk, could hold their breath for impossibly long periods, and seemed to communicate with the river dolphins in ways that defied explanation. Local midwives had been documenting these births for generations, but the families involved rarely spoke about them to outsiders, treating the children's abilities as both a blessing and a burden that marked them as different from their peers. As Elena compiled her research, she began to understand that the Boto legend wasn't just a cautionary tale about seductive strangers. It was a carefully preserved oral history of an ongoing phenomenon that connected human communities to the mysterious world beneath the Amazon's waters. But if the legend was based on something real, what did that mean for Anna, who was already showing signs of the dreamy detachment that marked all the other women who had experienced similar disappearances? 3 months after Anna's return, Rosa's worst fears began to manifest. Her daughter spent increasing amounts of time by the water's edge, often disappearing for hours only to return with her hair wet and her clothes damp, claiming she had been swimming despite the dangerous currents that made the river too treacherous for even experienced swimmers. Anna's behavior grew more erratic as the weeks passed. She would wake in the middle of the night and walk to the riverbank, standing waist-deep in the dark water while making strange clicking sounds that seemed to echo back from the depths. Dr. Elena had established a small research station in Iranduba, determined to document what she was beginning to believe was evidence of an entirely unknown form of interspecies communication. Her underwater recordings captured sounds that defied classification, complex vocalizations that seemed to blend human speech patterns with the echolocation calls of river dolphins. Most remarkably, these sounds were strongest during the nights, when Anna spent time in the water, suggesting some form of active communication between the girl and the creatures that lived beneath the surface. Rosa's grandmother, Donna Conceição, watched these developments with the resigned wisdom of someone who had seen this pattern before. "The river has claimed her," she told Rosa one afternoon, as they watched Anna floating motionlessly in a calm section of the current, her eyes closed and her face serene. Not in death, but in something else. Something that changes a person from the inside. The old woman had lived through her sister's transformation decades earlier, and knew that once the river's call took hold, there was no way to break the connection. The other villagers began to treat Anna with a mixture of reverence and fear that Rosa found deeply disturbing. Children would bring her small gifts, flowers, smooth stones, pieces of driftwood, which she would accept with a distant smile before carrying them into the water, where they would mysteriously disappear. The local fishermen reported that their nets were fuller when Anna was near the river, as if the fish were drawn to her presence, but they also spoke nervously of the way the pink dolphins seemed to follow her movements with an intelligence that went beyond normal animal behavior. Eleanor's research reached a breakthrough when she managed to capture underwater footage of Anna during one of her nocturnal river visits. The video showed the girl swimming with a grace and speed that seemed impossible for a human, diving to depths that should have been fatal without breathing equipment, and most astonishingly, appearing to communicate directly with a group of pink river dolphins that surrounded her like a protective escort. The footage was so extraordinary that Eleanor initially questioned whether her equipment was malfunctioning, but repeated recordings confirmed what seemed impossible to accept. As autumn approached, Anna's physical changes became more pronounced. Her eyes had developed a silvery quality that seemed to reflect light like those of nocturnal animals, and her skin had taken on the same subtle luminescence that Eleanor had noted in her medical examinations. Most dramatically, Anna had begun to exhibit gills, functional respiratory organs that appeared along her neck during her underwater excursions, allowing her to breathe beneath the surface for extended periods. Rosa watched in horror and fascination as her daughter transformed into something that was neither fully human nor entirely other, caught between two worlds in a way that the ancient legends had always described, but which modern minds struggled to accept. The truth about Anna's condition became undeniable when Dr. Elena's medical tests confirmed what Rosa had been dreading to hear. Her daughter was pregnant, but the pregnancy exhibited characteristics that defied medical understanding. The ultrasound images showed a fetus that appeared to be developing both human and aquatic traits, with what looked like protofins alongside normal limbs, and an advanced cardiovascular system that seemed designed for underwater life. Elena had never seen anything like it in her years of medical training, and she struggled to find scientific explanations for what appeared to be an impossible biological phenomenon. Anna received the news with an otherworldly calm that had become her normal demeanor since her return from the river. "I knew," she told her mother with that distant smile that had replaced her once vibrant personality. "They told me in the deep places. They said the children would be bridges between the worlds, able to live in both the water and on land." When Rosa pressed her for details about who they were, Anna's responses became even more cryptic, filled with references to ancient voices and underwater cities that existed beneath the muddy surface of the Amazon. Elena's research into similar cases across the region revealed a disturbing pattern that had been hidden for generations. The children born to women who had experienced encounters with the Boto were indeed different, but their fates varied dramatically. Some grew up to be extraordinary swimmers and divers who worked as guides and fishermen with supernatural skills on the water. Others displayed such strong aquatic adaptations that they struggled to survive in normal terrestrial environments, often dying in childhood from respiratory complications that doctors couldn't understand or treat. But there was a third group that Elena's investigation uncovered: children who had simply vanished during adolescence, always near the water, always leaving behind families who spoke in whispers about their offspring returning to the river that had created them. These disappearances were never reported to authorities, treated instead as a natural part of a cycle that the river communities had learned to accept over generations. The families mourned, but they also understood that their unusual children belonged to something larger than human society. As Anna's pregnancy progressed, the physical changes accelerated beyond anything Eleanor had documented in her research. Anna's skin developed a translucent quality that revealed a network of blood vessels adapted for extracting oxygen from water. Her hands and feet showed the beginnings of webbing, and her spine began to elongate in a way that suggested the development of a rudimentary tail structure. Most remarkably, Anna seemed to be losing her ability to survive out of water for extended periods, requiring frequent submersion in the river to maintain her health and vitality. The village of Iranduba found itself at the center of something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the natural world. Scientists began arriving from universities across Brazil, drawn by Elena's preliminary reports and the extraordinary footage she had captured. But the attention made the local community deeply uncomfortable. They had lived with the Boto legend for generations, accepting it as part of the mysterious relationship between their people and the river that sustained them. The idea of their sacred mysteries becoming the subject of academic study and media speculation felt like a violation of something ancient and precious. Rosa faced an impossible choice as she watched her daughter's transformation accelerate. Anna was becoming something wonderful and terrible, caught between human and aquatic existence in a way that might not be sustainable for either her or the child she carried. The question that haunted Rosa's sleepless nights was whether love meant trying to keep her daughter in the human world that was slowly killing her, or accepting that Anna's destiny lay beneath the dark waters of the Amazon, in a realm where mothers couldn't follow and science couldn't explain. On a moonless night in November, exactly 9 months after her mysterious disappearance, Anna made her final choice. Rosa woke to find her daughter's bed empty, and the house eerily silent, except for the sound of the river lapping against the shore. She rushed to the water's edge where she found Anna standing waist-deep in the current, her transformed body glowing with an inner light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with something deep beneath the surface. The girl who had once been Rosa's daughter turned to look at her mother one last time, and in that gaze was both infinite love and an otherworldly knowledge that belonged to neither human nor dolphin, but to something entirely new. "I have to go where I can give birth safely," Anna said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from the water itself. "The baby needs both worlds to survive, and I can only provide that in the deep places." As she spoke, the surface around her began to ripple with movement as dozens of pink dolphins emerged from the depths, their sleek forms creating a living circle around the transformed girl. Dr. Elena, who had been monitoring Anna's condition around the clock, arrived just in time to witness what would become the most extraordinary footage in the history of marine biology. Rosa wanted to scream, to plunge into the water and drag her daughter back to shore, but something in Anna's serene expression stopped her. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a completion. The girl had found her place in a world that existed between the legends of the past and the possibilities of a future where the boundaries between species might not be as fixed as humans had always believed. As Anna began to submerge herself completely, her body underwent a final transformation that was both beautiful and heartbreaking to witness. The watching. Dolphins began to sing, a complex chorus of clicks, whistles, and harmonics that seemed to welcome Anna into their community while simultaneously bidding farewell to the human world she was leaving behind. Elena's recording equipment captured every note of this interspecies lullaby, but no amount of scientific analysis could fully explain the emotional depth of what they were witnessing. Rosa felt tears streaming down her face as she realized that her daughter was not dying, but being reborn into something magnificent and strange. As dawn broke over the Amazon, the singing faded and the dolphins dispersed, leaving only ripples on the water's surface to mark where Anna had vanished. But this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Over the following months, fishermen began reporting encounters with a figure that moved through the water with dolphin-like grace, but retained unmistakably human characteristics. Children playing by the river spoke of a beautiful woman who would sometimes surface near their boats, always accompanied by pink dolphins, and always carrying what appeared to be an infant that seemed equally at home in air and water. Dr. Elena remained in Iranduba for 2 years, documenting these sightings and slowly coming to understand that the Boto legend wasn't just folklore. It was an ongoing evolutionary process that had been occurring for centuries, creating hybrid offspring that served as bridges between aquatic and terrestrial life. Her research would eventually revolutionize the field of marine biology, but more importantly, it would provide scientific validation for the traditional knowledge that Amazonian communities had preserved for generations. Rosa never saw her daughter again in the conventional sense, but she often felt Anna's presence during quiet moments by the river. Sometimes, when the pink dolphins surfaced near the village, Rosa could swear she heard her daughter's laughter carried on the evening breeze. The loss was profound, but so was the understanding that Anna had become part of something larger and more mysterious than any single human life. The river had indeed claimed her daughter, but in doing so, it had also given birth to a new form of existence that embodied the very essence of the Amazon itself, wild, ancient, and forever beyond the complete understanding of those who lived only on land. Anna's incredible transformation reminds us that the Amazon holds mysteries deeper than science can fully explain. The legend of the Boto lives on in these river communities, bridging the gap between folklore and reality. If this story left you spellbound, subscribe for more haunting Amazon legends and share your thoughts. Do you believe some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved?